Hi, everybody. It's Robin. It's the new, and hold on one second. I just got to go back to here I am. Here I am. It's Robin, and welcome to week 4 of True Colors MiniCon. It's been an exciting process. We've learned a lot. I think we're streaming live on everywhere we're supposed to be going today, which would be really great if that's the case. So welcome. We're glad you're here. We're going to start today with a conversation again about sort of Black Lives Matter, because it's really so much in the right now that we need to work on. And so, you know, as a white person and for lots of white folks, the question is, you know, how do we support Black Lives Matter? And the answer that many Black leaders have given to me is that we need to listen, we need to learn, and then we need to support and amplify their message. And so as individuals, that's something that is really important. The other question is when you come in, so it's really important for us as individuals, but the other piece of that is that we come in as white providers. We're often in positions of leadership with LGBT youth of color. And so we've got a panel of folks, which is interesting. Some of the folks who are on this panel I'm looking at the folks who just came in. So Mo's here and Alberto's here. You guys are not actually on until 3. So you're welcome to hang out, but we're going to keep you.
Sorry, I can't hear you. If you can hear me, just a second.
We can hear you. We're going to keep you guys muted until it's your turn, okay? We're waiting right at the moment for, hold on one second. I just need to let in the folks who are coming into the panel. What we're waiting for, there's Rae. Hi, Rae. Welcome. Rae's coming in. And then we're waiting for Tyrone and Richard and Michael. But
hello.
So is coming in. And then we're waiting for Tyrone and Richard and Michael. But
Hello.
So is coming in, and then we're waiting. Okay. So
hey, Robin.
Yep, I had to mute Rae because we're both on the same thing. So Mo and Alberto, you're welcome to hang out. You're also welcome to log out and come back in later if you'd like to. So either way works for you, works there. So the rest of the folks are sort of here now. So I'm going to I'm going to sort of turn it over to, and I'm really honored to do this. Tanisha Arena is someone who's been a mentor for True Colors in the past. She has been doing, I just let her speak in her own words. She said, I left the private sector for nonprofit to make a difference in the work I do. From being an author, a mentor for LGBTQ plus youth, a youth worker, domestic violence advocate, and now executive director of Arise for Social Justice. My heart is in helping people identify and overcome barriers, figure out their best selves, and then helping them get there. I am part of the community I serve, and I bring my whole self to this work. Each layer of my identity contributing to cultivating relationships and building bridges in the community. I believe in connections, in the power of community, and in speaking your truth. Authenticity will never go out of style. So Tanisha, I am going to back out and mute myself, and you can take over from here and introduce your participants, and I will just be watching from the background. Thank you so much, and taking notes.
All right, great. Thank you for that fabulous introduction. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to be a part of this conversation. Thank you to Robin for the invitation. We are having this panel to discuss what white providers need to think about when they're working with Black and Brown youth. And on this panel, we have Rae Perteet, Tyrone Walker, Mike Forbes, Alberto Cifuentes is here. So why don't we go ahead and jump right in and get your individual thoughts. Actually, why don't we do a round of introductions? Our panelists, feel free to introduce yourselves and your connection to this work.
Hi, Tanisha, let me jump in. I guess I will also introduce the person beneath me, Richard DeMay, who just joined in.
Here we go. Yep, Richard is here.
Yeah, he's our partner. So I've been involved with True Colors for a good gravy. It feels like close to 15 years. Started as a volunteer and mentor, and now finishing a stint as a board member. And the introduction to True Colors, obviously it's a fabulous organization, and its mission is just critical and needed. But as a new mentor, I was moved by how there's such an intersectionality of issues that impact the youth that are part of True Colors. In some ways, their LGBTQ identities are only a portion of really what they are bringing when they come to a mentoring relationship. I mean, obviously, I'd say the impact of race is there because many of them come because families have been impacted by some dysfunction that may have broken them up, and they have needs to exist within a community of color where their identity is only is just a multiplicity of things. It's both racial, it's both gender, it's their sexual orientation, and as I just feel like anyone working with them needs to embrace the ability to let them bring all themselves to the table, right? And you need to be able to embrace and be open to where they may need to go in the relationship with you. So I would say the one is just to be open to the intersectionality of issues and personalities that they bring to the table as a mentee.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Certainly in these times, the intersections of our identities, they do matter, especially for our young people, and to have an outlet for that. Should we just go across the screen? Mike, you're next. Should we just take it there?
Sure. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Forbes. I'm fairly new to True Colors as a mentor, but to piggyback off what Tyrone specified in regards to allowing people to bring their full selves, and showing up as their whole and full authentic selves is very important because Blackness does intersect and brownness across various measures of marginalized communities. So it's important to be able to show up with all yourself and not feel like you need to omit pieces of yourself for comfortability. So it's very important to really just show up whole and full and be able to connect with all parts of your identity to what makes you whole.
Absolutely. Cross again, Richard. What are your thoughts? Oh, you're muted.
What was the question? I entered after the question was asked.
Oh, well, we are talking, introducing yourself and your connection to True Colors, and also talking about what you think white providers need to think about when they are working with Black and brown youth.
So I was introduced to True Colors through Tyrone, my partner, and I'm also a school teacher at the high school level. So I actually was familiar with True Colors, but I had never participated. But once I got involved through Tyrone, I immediately got my students involved as well. To answer the question or give some thoughts about that, I think that white providers or in True Colors need to be aware of the existence. You know, Blackness does exist, and not pretend that that it doesn't exist, or pretend that we are in a colorblind society, and definitely not in the United States of America. You know, I think there needs to be an awareness, and there needs to be acting upon that awareness, and definitely practice equity across the board, and not just simply speak around it or speak about it, but we need to live it. It needs to be acted out in our deeds, in our in the way we treat each other, in the way we dismantle all of the systemic inequities and injustices. And we need to,
Absolutely.
and I believe we need to start somehow, somewhere in schools as well, because you know all of these ideas and white supremacy and oppression and systemic injustices are introduced in society, but also perpetuated through our school system. And so if children are being misled, hoodwinked, just lied to through their courses, I think that needs to be dismantled.
Absolutely. Now, being that you are in the school system, can you elaborate on some of those experiences? Like, is your high school, like, is there a nurse on staff? Are you seeing disparities there in terms of, you know, a white provider and engaging with students?
So for the longest time in my school, I teach here in the city in Hartford, and for quite a number of years, I was the only Black male teacher in my building in Hartford. So that is pretty telling. And so I've made it a duty of mine every single year to ask my students through a questionnaire how many of them had a Black teacher, a Black male teacher. And every year, I would say anywhere between 85 and 95% of my students, most of whom were students of color, had never, from K through getting to me, had never had a Black male teacher. And in fact, for most of them, I was the very first Black teacher. And from most of them also the very first Black male teacher they've ever had, starting from kindergarten all the way up to 11th grade.
Wow. Which the population is predominantly black and brown, and the teaching staff is probably predominantly white.
Yes.
Telling. Right. How about you, Rae? What are your thoughts on this topic, and how were you introduced to True Colors?
Yeah, absolutely. Rae Perteet. I'm a mentoring coordinator here at True Colors, and so just working on making those healthy connections between mentees and mentors. I think if there's one thing I wanted to point out is probably just piggybacking on what everyone else has said and realizing how we fit into it, that America has this orientation towards progress. It's fantastic, but we often want to talk about how this is better than 1950s or 1960s, but oftentimes that blinds us between the gap between where we are right now and where we need to be. And I think perhaps one of the first things we can do to solve it is just look in the mirror. I'm not suggesting that anyone watching is racist per se, but I am saying that we have a propensity and capacity, all of us, to put into our own biases, to engage in social norms with kind of being blind to them. And we're not great at challenging those biases. And so I think if there's a start, it's simply there. Being able to kind of challenge those biases and start maybe even at a local level, talk to our county, talk to our state, and see if we can kind of challenge those systemic biases of racism that exist and ask our legislators to move things forward. I think that's absolutely huge. So many people have said to me during this whole social situation, well, how can I help? And sometimes that reads as a way to sort of assuage our own guilt. But I think if you really want to help, there are resources out there. And I do think it starts at a local level and trying to challenge some of these systemic biases.
Absolutely. I would say that it's not enough to say that I'm not racist. Folks need to be engaged in doing anti-racist work, which is, again, checking your own biases and doing that work to find out the ways that you are contributing to white supremacy and how you could dismantle that. And I think it's important for all kinds of providers who are engaging with Black and Brown young people to understand cultural relevance, the historical context. I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to chime in about that part, because it is something that certainly sticks out to me. We're living in a country that has a history of injustice against Black and Brown people when it comes to all kinds of, services from banking to medicine. The list could go on and on and on. And if you could talk to white providers about that, what would you say?
So, Tanisha, let me chime in. I think I'm thinking of two examples I want to share. Richard and I recently had an informal mentoring relationship with a younger Black teenager who is LGBTQ within just the community. And so two things that you hit on is one of the ways that I was able to impact him as a young person was actually helping him navigate open a bank account. There's some of the practical things. Sometimes you may think sometimes a white provider that the issue is their discomfort with LGBTQ, and that is there. There's not a question that can be there, but there are other practical things that also are gaps. Sometimes people live in worlds where you're very disconnected from what I'm calling the mainstream norms you may find in society. And what I didn't have understanding of is in helping him open a checking account or a savings account, it actually indirectly helped his family, because his family now was able to access banking and get additional services that I didn't know what you don't know what people have or don't have, right? Until you offer an assistance, and then you see the benefits of the assistance. The second thing that was impactful is for this person. Again, I had no idea of this person's life, but Richard and I were the first loving gay couple that he had seen that looked like him. And it told me that, oh, okay, so if you're a white provider, you may need to go beyond just not being racist. You may need to go get some Black friends if you don't have Black friends, right? Because your mentees may need to see people of color in different places and spaces, right? You don't need to feel like as a white provider that you have to do everything. In some ways, you may need to just facilitate them meeting other folks that look like them, because in some ways, having people see people that look like them can be inspiring in its own way, beyond anything we can talk about in a book or show through a video.
Absolutely. Representation matters. And just even, having a mentee that is looking for someone that looks like them in spaces where you don't usually see Black and brown faces, so I think that's something to be mindful of as well, and the activities that your mentee might want to be engaged in. So Mike, I'm going to throw it over to you. What are your thoughts?
I agree. Representation definitely plays a big factor, to have that connection and see that, okay, well, there is someone else like me out there that I could connect with and that I can kind of relate to. So, these white providers need to actually really go beyond just the surface and dig a little deeper to really make sure that there is some comfort level and some type of connection that the mentees can have, besides just the one-on-one, but more so of a full relation type of connection with people like themselves.
Absolutely. Richard, we're back to you. Oh, you're muted.
Okay.
It's part of Zoom culture.
Thank you. I think also white providers need to become aware of the perhaps unintended microaggressions that are that they engage in, you know, just having assumptions that are just based on stereotypes or just based on nothing, but just assumptions. Um, uh, I'm thinking in terms of school. You know, what I've seen from my students. And you know, I'm not out in my school. However, I've been the GCA coordinator in my building, and I have welcoming signs and safe space signs on my door, and so students readily come and talk about their, you know, their sexuality and issues. So there's an open door policy in my room, and oftentimes um, my students have expressed, um, you know, that other teachers make comments, maybe well-intentioned, but they definitely come across, you know, they're just uh, comments that are inappropriate and judgmental and just downright offensive. And so I think providers, much like white providers, much like white teachers, need to become aware of what comes out of their mouths, what they're thinking about, and question themselves. You know, do some internal digging and finding out, where do these ideas come from. You know, I think there needs to be some inner work happening with white providers. You know, you have to do some soul searching, some analysis of yourself to find out, you know, before you say things, you know, find out, where is this idea coming from, and then you know, um, you, you need to also open yourself up as a white provider or a white teacher to learn from people of color. So subject yourself to learning. And sometimes that means you have to give up your leadership, or this sense that as a white person, you're always in charge. You're always the provider. You're always the leader. You're the default person, you know, as a white person, especially in this country. You know, knowledge is seen as, you know, the white people are seen as the ones who provide knowledge, you know, and so they have to be willing to give that up, especially when dealing with you know, people of color, and those, especially those whom they serve.
Absolutely. You're getting all the head nods and everything else. So definitely agree with what you're saying. Rae, I saw you doing the head nodding and shaking. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And just to kind of piggyback on what Tyrone has said, I think it really starts with us getting outside of our comfort zone and beginning those conversations. I think the statistics are the average white American only has one Black friend. They may have 30 or 40 other individuals in their circle, but they only know one Black friend. And that means that most white Americans don't have any Black people that they personally know. So I think the situations of cultural contrast are just exasperated when we don't have a foundation of how to speak to each other. We don't even have a reference point. And I think in that medium, fear blossoms. And so I think if you're going to have a connection with a youth of color, or just exist in our current society, you have to step outside of your personal boundaries and start having those friendships, start having those connections. It's the only way that we can have an honest dialogue.
Absolutely. Richard?
Yeah, could I say some, you know, name Rayfield? Yeah, I want to piggyback on what he says. You know, from throughout most of my life, I've had white friends because I'm foreign to this country. And so in Aruba, where I'm from, the majority population is non-Black. Aruba's in the Caribbean, but it's one of two islands in the Caribbean that is predominantly white or non-Black. And so all my life I grew up surrounded by white people, and and didn't in Aruba at the time when I grew up, race was not an identifier of people. So I grew up literally, it sounds like cliche, but I grew up sort of colorblind to race in particular. And so, but I've evolved since then. I've been in this country now for almost 30 years. But because of where I come from and who I am, the sum total of everything, I've had many white friends here. And I would say most of my white friends here, I'm their first and only Black friend. And when I have pressed them and gotten into conversations about race, I realized that there's a term I learned from a course I took with John Selders last year and earlier this year. And one of the participants in there talked about having a Black friend as a Black friend light, like a transition Black friend. And so and I was fascinated by the term Black light. And so many of my white American friends see me as Black light. So I'm not fully Black because I have an accent, because my perspective is different, because my history is different, my upbringing is different, and so they see me as, oh, okay, Richard is Black, but he's not quite all the way Black because he wasn't born and raised here, so he is my friend. And so they run every question they have about Black people to me. Every question, before they say something, do something that involves a Black person, they run it by me and say, hey, what do you think? Should I say this? Should I ask this? Can I say this? Can I do this without offending Black people? And oftentimes I have to say, well, I don't think I speak for African Americans, for one, because I'm not technically African American. I am Black, but nonetheless, I'm not African American. I don't have the same history. The microaggressions I may not all get from white Americans. And so I think that needs to be said, that there are many white people who perhaps that one Black friend they have, which is ridiculous, but that one Black friend they have is perhaps that one Black friend they have identified as Black light. And some, I think that needs to be said somehow.
Absolutely. And that brings me to, thoughts on, if you are, mentoring young people and there are things that are going on in their experience of Black and Brown identity and having space for that. And I think about us as, Black and Brown professionals, and with everything that's going on in our society right now with the murder of George Floyd, and how many of us sat on Zoom meetings like the next day with white colleagues who it was business as usual, but Black and Brown colleagues were feeling a world of hurt. Any thoughts on that? We'll go back to Tyrone.
Tanisha, my company, and I will, transparency, right? My day job is with Pratt & Whitney. So it's conservative, mainstream American Fortune 50 company. And even they did a stand down this week. Yeah, I was surprised, right? The situations of the George Floyd murder, right? And the response to it has made everyone get off the sidelines. So the first time, in corporate life, I've heard, we had a session, right? We had a session with the African American Forum leading the fleet with the other employee groups, doing a panel discussion where leaders of the company were like, okay, we got to talk about race. We cannot not talk about race anymore, right? And the whole discussion was Black folks, to your point, Tanisha, sharing I was angry. I was a mess. And I wasn't, people weren't able to function at work the next day like business as usual. and talking about how significant it was to have white colleagues at least acknowledge, like, hey, something's going on. I'm concerned about you. If you need to talk, yeah, I'm here, right? And just having people acknowledge something really is changing in America. And such tragedy that's happening, I think people are connecting with the fact that Blacks in general are being impacted by these events, you know, as if it's your own relative. And so there was the acknowledgement that we need to begin to have uncomfortable conversations. And that the one thing we have to change in our culture is one that says the status quo is acceptable of just not talking. You know, we left that discussion saying we cannot sweep this under the rug. We have to be able to have conversations, and we have to give space to Black folks to actually voice some stuff. We know there's stuff we suck in all the time, little slights, microaggressions, discrimination in the workplace that we kind of, as one of the execs, and he's a Black exec, says, look, I'm a Black exec, I still got to, like, you know, be twice as good, right? He's saying that even at his level, he makes strategic calculations as to which issues and fights to have and how that's just a weight. So yes, Tanisha, I'm just saying that all over, folks are beginning to recognize we've got to begin to talk about race, and collectively we have to actively work to dismantle racism, right, within our worlds and places and spaces. And yeah, I want to stop there, but I want to piggyback on the thing we said before, which is around the Black friend thing. White providers need to bridge that by finding ways to navigate Black institutions.
Absolutely.
Black church, Black fraternities, sororities, organizations, there are places and spaces to bring your mentee to help them connect, because you're right, we can't depend on white folks having a bench of culturally competent Black folk and people of color that are going to help, you know, help them be equipped to handle all situations.
And Tanisha, I hope I hope during this time we've been able to have just a little bit of a tidbit of what it takes to sort of go a little bit deeper into the process. And hopefully individuals will start seeking that for themselves. I did learn that we are running out of time for this section of the MiniCon.
Fantastic conversation, and one that I think we could certainly continue for more than the time that we had. I want to thank the panelists here, Tyrone, Richard, Mike, Rae, Robin again, but we have reached the end of our discussion segment. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, everybody. That was a great start. And I do want you to know that it's our intention to do a much longer version of this. You know, the MiniCon is really set up in, 25-minute intervals, but we want to do a whole conversation. And so we'll be reaching back out to folks to really make it a community conversation. The responses on YouTube and Facebook, there's lots and lots of comments that are coming up, and we're going to be recording those and bringing those back into the conversation once we have a little bit of a break. And so Rae's back on at 3:00, and so we'll be able to begin to respond to some of those then. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how grateful I am to each of you. Sincere, I'm sorry that you didn't get a chance to say something, but if you want to come back at 2:30, we would love to have you. I mean, at 3:00, have you on that panel.
All right.
All right. So thanks very much, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
And we'll talk again soon. Thank you. And so now I'm going to change how the screen is doing. Thanks, everybody. Caitlin, I almost can see you. There you are. So thank you, everybody. Sorry, we're running just a little bit late. It is my absolute honor to introduce Caitlin Ryan to our audience. And as you know, we're running live on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Instagram. Caitlin, I have been following Caitlin's work for a really long time. She is my hero. And, and so I'm just going to read a little bit about who she is. And she has 45 years of experience. So this is a capsule of what she does. That she's the director of the Family Acceptance Project, which is a research, education, and intervention and policy program. She works to help ethnically, racially, and religiously diverse families to support their LGBTQ plus children. That Caitlin's research is seminal in this area. And it's so clear that the single most important factor that determines outcome based on her research is the response of families to their coming out. And so over these many years, she's developed a lot of tools that they've been using to help families move closer to acceptance. So wherever you start is where you start. Let's see how we can change some of your behaviors in ways that will increase the protectiveness and decrease the risk that your kids will be facing. So I'm very excited to have her here. I'm actually going to shut up now and ask Caitlin to introduce and say, and I'm going to, Caitlin, I'm going to move you into the speaker view so that you are the main person on there. So welcome. Thanks for being here. I know your schedule is crazy.
Thanks, Robin. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here at the MiniCon. I was reminiscing the other day, the first time that Robin invited me to present at the True Colors conference was early in our work, and 6 people came to my presentation. But Robin, stalwart that she is, brought me in and made sure that those 6 people had access to this information. And I'm grateful that she's helped disseminate our work since then. So Robin, I've got some slides. It's pretty hard to tell this story.
You want to just share your screen?
I'll share my screen, exactly. And
let me just make sure yeah, you should be able to share it set up that way. There you go.
So it's impossible to tell this story without showing you some pictures. Of course, I started this work many, many years ago, and I started really planning it in the 1980s. Now, of course, we're in the middle of another pandemic, one that has profound consequences for everything. And over the past 40 years, we've seen enormous gains with services, support, standards of care for our LGBTQ young people. But COVID-19 really threatens that. It threatens it with turning the clock back, pushing young people into rejecting and unsupportive environments, increasing risk, and also increasing risk for trauma, because not only is family rejection traumatic, but the kinds of experiences of loss of support, loss of external resources, peers, school, structure, confinement, an uncertain future, this really has a very powerful impact on what's happening. The good news is that families matter, families can make a difference, and even though lots of people think they can't and don't change their behaviors, I've now worked with thousands of LGBTQ youth over the years, and I'm happy to say that families from all different kinds of backgrounds can change and grow and learn. So when we started this project, no one had studied the families of LGBTQ young people. Those families were seen as rejecting and unable to learn to support their children. So youth were served alone, unlike their peers, which were always served, at least to some extent, in relationship to their families. And peer support really became a lifeline and the one place where young people could get the support they needed to survive. And so many of you were involved in doing this work. But the services didn't include their parents and caregivers. And providers didn't believe then, and many still don't believe, that families that we see as rejecting can learn to support their LGBT children. It's an extraordinary time because the internet has changed everything. It's changed access to information. It's given children images of themselves that are positive and wholesome, to have a sense of who they are for the future. And this really means that they're coming out in childhood, not just transgender children that many people think of, but gay kids, whatever language they use. And of course, for gay kids, it's really hard for parents to find resources because there aren't services for those those young people as there may be for others. Misinformation is still a huge issue for families, as are major gaps in terms of any kind of services for families, especially those that are diverse. So when I started this project, I didn't just start it to do research. I really started it to change how practice happened, to create the first evidence-based family support model, to change how education was provided, and to develop informed public policy. Our unit of intervention, if you will, is the family. We focus on families, not just that young person. And our work is strengths-based. It uses a harm reduction framework. We align our messaging, our framing, our research findings with the family's underlying cultural values. And that makes it feel safe. It makes it feel familiar, and it enables us to build a relationship with parents and caregivers to help them learn to support that LGBT child, even if they think that being gay or transgender is wrong. And so we implement our work in the context of their cultural, religious, and social worlds. Some of you have heard me perhaps talk about the project. It's participatory. There are lots of different parts to it. We had a whole series of linked studies, but it started where we start in our work with LGBT young people and families, in their homes, in their communities, in their neighborhoods. And we did extraordinary in-depth interviews of 2 to 4 hour individual interviews each, with each LGBT young person and key family members. And it taught us an enormous amount, but it also showed us more than 100 specific accepting and rejecting behaviors that parents and caregivers use to respond to their LGBT children. And these behaviors then became a new language, they became a foundation, and they became a way to reach parents and caregivers who may have been responding to their child in ways that rejected them, trying to change them, telling them they were ashamed of them, not letting them have an LGBT friend. But the challenge was those parents saw those behaviors as trying to help their child fit in, have a good life, stay connected to their family. So we could separate the behavior from intent and help them understand through our research that those behaviors that child experienced as rejecting, or that we may see as rejecting, were actually very harmful. And there were other supportive and affirming behaviors they could do that could help reduce their child's risk and promote well-being. So this kind of shows you some of the relationship between early information that we studied about their adolescent lives and how these issues affected them as a young adult. These are some of the research-defined family rejecting behaviors. They're pretty common. And some of the accepting behaviors that we identified, more than 50 of each in our research. And then we measured them to show how they predict risk or well-being, how they contribute to health risks, wellness, overall sense of self-esteem, and overall positive health as a young person. These are some of the outcomes, if you want to call them that. With lots of rejecting behaviors, we always saw a lot of risk. And on the top upper left-hand side, you're seeing high levels of clinical depression with more than 16 symptoms of depression. And with lots of those rejecting behaviors during adolescence, we saw more than 6 times greater likelihood of high levels of depression as a young adult. If you drop down to the lower left corner, you're going to see lifetime suicide attempts with lots of those rejecting behaviors during adolescence and a more than 8 times greater likelihood of attempted suicide as a young adult. And you can see that even ambivalence, even moderate levels of family rejection are related to risk. But you can also see the significant levels of decrease in those negative health experiences when parents and caregivers could learn to reduce rejecting behaviors and increase supportive behaviors. We studied gender conformity, parents pressuring their children to fit into those gender norms, and we saw how this relates to high levels of depression, attempted suicide, illegal drug use, and risk for HIV. But the challenge is that rejection of LGBT identities is normalized. It's also traumatic. Many LGBT young people expect these rejecting experiences, and they see it as the price of being connected to their families or their cultural worlds. At the same time, they don't really know that these behaviors have such a negative impact on their sense of self-worth, depression, substance use, HIV, relationships, sense of the future. These behaviors are typically culturally transmitted and enforced, and they're transmitted through religious values and beliefs as well. Parents learn these behaviors intergenerationally. Just how they learn to parent, they learn how to express these behaviors. And parents and caregivers that are struggling with trying to reconcile having an LGBT child with trying to figure out what this means for their cultural world, for their lives, they're really trying to figure out how can they make sure that child is connected to the family, that they're going to be okay, that they're going to be happy and healthy. And so that really becomes a crisis for the parents and caregivers that we work to help them resolve. One of the challenges that we face now is that many people all over the world see conversion therapy as the one worst thing that could happen to an LGBT person of any age, but especially young people. Well, conversion therapy is really only one of more than 50 family rejecting behaviors, all of which start at home. Parents and caregivers use these behaviors to socialize that child to fit into their cultural world. Young people are continually exposed to these behaviors, not only through their families, but outside in their communities, in their networks, among adults that they interact with in their congregations. And all of these rejecting behaviors contribute to health risks. So the focus on conversion therapy is the one thing we need to change. It's helped lots of people worldwide understand that this is a very negative behavior. It's a very negative experience, and we need to stop it and change it. But it doesn't really deal with the underlying issue, which is that parents start these behaviors at home. They're the gatekeepers to take their children outside to therapists and religious leaders, where others are doing it as well, as not just the family and caregivers, but also religious leaders and therapists. And so we have to focus on the families because that's really where it starts. We really can't prevent conversion efforts without educating and supporting those parents. We actually found that more than half of LGBT young people in our research, their parents and caregivers had tried to change them. They had tried to change them in their homes. And when they did that, they were twice as likely to try to take their lives and twice as likely to report high levels of depression. But parents also took them outside the home. So among that half of young people, about a third of them also took them to therapists and religious leaders, where the risk increased to nearly 3 times as likely to attempt suicide, or 3 times as likely to report high levels of depression. So the issue here is not that it just affects depression, mental health, suicidality, substance use. We saw a relationship with increased sexual health risks, but we also found that it affects that young person's ability to care for themselves as an adult. So when parents tried to change them, whether it was in the home with all of those different behaviors or taking them outside for somebody outside the home to try to fix them or change them, it impaired their ability for self-care as a young adult. And by that, I mean, they had much lower levels of education and income compared with peers whose parents and caregivers never tried to change them, either in the home or outside the home. And that adds another layer to how rejection, how powerful it is, how it informs our lives, how it affects us in so many ways, even as we get older. The good news is that parents have a very positive impact. A little bit of change makes a difference. When young people are supported and accepted by their parents and caregivers, they believe that they can have a happy life. They are much more likely to engage in self-care, to use seatbelts, to use condoms, to be in relationships with people who are supportive of them and care about them and nurture them, to see that they can do the things in their lives that they really want to do, to have a sense of agency and self-efficacy. Looking at this graphic, this actually is at the bottom of our new Healthy Futures posters series. It's an infographic that shows as you add more of those rejecting behaviors, you begin to add much higher levels of risk for depression, suicidality, sexual health risks, illegal drug use, all the way up to those high levels of risk on the right-hand side of this slide. We saw the same thing with family accepting and supportive behaviors, that as you began to add more of those behaviors, you began to see better overall health, much less likely to think about or attempt suicide or have substance use problems, a higher sense of self-worth, better family relationships, a very, very different outcome and present for that young person. So of course, research is great, but you have to use it. So we've developed a lot of different tools, as Robin said, including a family intervention model based on our research and a lot of different kinds of resources, most of which are up on our website for you to use. And we also have them in print copies. One of the important things about FAP is that the different elements of our model, even very simple education with parents and caregivers, or self-education by parents going to our website and downloading one of our family education booklets, or looking at our Healthy Futures posters, they can self-educate on what this really means. How can they change the way they're interacting with their child? How can they reduce their child's risk? One of the exciting things that happened last year was we integrated FAP's core components into trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, working with Judy Cohen and her colleagues, who are the founders and developers of TFCBT. They found that when they incorporated these elements into their model, they saw a significant decrease in post-traumatic stress, from severe to no PTSD, or severe and mild. And now this combined approach, this combined framing, is available for people to use with LGBT young people who have already experienced trauma, to treat trauma. But FAP is being applied in lots of different ways in family preservation. We're integrating into the foster care system and out-of-home services, behavioral health, school-based services, and pastoral care. And as Robin mentioned, we work with families from all different kinds of backgrounds, including those that were previously seen as, there's really nothing we can do with them. How can we work with them? How could we even begin? But we have begun, and we train all over the world, and we can help you understand how to do that. So here's the good news again. If we go upstream to early childhood and begin to educate parents when their kids are little, can you imagine what would happen by the time a child is age 10 and maybe is already coming out, or beginning to realize what their identity is and how they fit in the world? And even when family conflict erupts, and after a young person ends up out of home, we can make a difference. And this work is really, really hopeful. And that is really important, especially considering the kinds of challenges we have faced and that we're facing now. These are some of the basic components of our family intervention model. I don't really have time to go into them now, but assessment is really important because we learn who the family is. What are their values and beliefs? What are their cultural and religious learnings, teachings, expectations? What do they then expect from their child? And how can we join with them to help provide the most culturally grounded psychoeducation and skill building, and of course, peer support? These are some of the elements of our model as well, and some of the basic components of how we're working with families in each one of those different frames, if you will, to help them decrease their child's risk, increase support, reconcile cultural and religious beliefs that may be at odds with having an LGBT child, and learn how to integrate their child into their social world as an LGBT young person, affirmatively and nurturing them. We shift the focus from morality to health and well-being. Talking about morality is a circular argument. You get nowhere. We want to get somewhere, and we want to reduce risk and improve that young person's well-being and help them feel centered in their families as quickly as possible. Here's the good news. We can help reduce those rejecting behaviors. Very diverse families can learn to support their LGBT children. Part of the reason for that is we're giving them language for the head and language for the heart. We're giving them a framework of research findings that are published in top-tiered academic journals. They're empirically grounded. Our research really worked with families from all different kinds of backgrounds to have us teach us how to use it, how to apply it, how to work with families from different kinds of cultural and religious worlds. And so we can give families a reason to change. We can't change anyone, but we can help them understand what's happening with their children. How can they support them? How can they keep their family together? And how can they prevent those tragic outcomes for their child and foster wellness? So here are some of those negative risks that LGBT youth and young adults are so commonly exposed to and experience and have higher levels of risk for. And the good news is that we can prevent and ameliorate these negative outcomes using a family-based approach. And nothing is hopeless. Hope starts here, and we have to build hope. And we build that by increasing connectedness, which is the most basic sinew, really, of our humanity. So lots of resources and tools, family education booklets. We have 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Chinese. And we've started a faith-based series, and we've disseminated over 600,000 copies in 70 countries. It's on our webpage, and you can download these. We have them in print. We've developed family intervention videos that are short, culturally grounded documentaries that show how diverse families move from struggle to support of their LGBT children, and they humanize their lives, which is so important. As I mentioned, we do training everywhere. We do basic training. We've now gone online with our trainings, and we do consultation to help people integrate this work into their systems of care or their agencies. Mm-hmm. We have assessment materials that helps families understand how they're growing and changing and are able to document those changes, which really is important, of course, in building the field of family intervention. We have these great new Healthy Futures posters that are up on our website. They're in 2 languages, and I'm thrilled to say that we're working with various API groups to put them into 5 new Asian languages. It's going to take time and resources. So if there's anyone out there that wants to help us fund this, I eagerly look forward to talking with you. But these are grounded in our research. On 1 page, on a single page, you have a visual that tells the story of family rejection and acceptance. And we also have a version for conservative settings that doesn't talk about supporting LGBT dating or same-sex relationships, which is a doorstopper in many cultural worlds. Everyone needs to learn the language of acceptance and rejection. We talk a lot about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and lots of people are screening for those, but ACEs doesn't screen for being a queer kid. Mm-hmm. It doesn't screen related for behaviors that are empirically identified and measured related to sexual orientation and gender identity. So people can be screened for ACEs or LGBTQ and have a low score, even though they've experienced these very traumatic, rejecting behaviors. And we need to know that. Part of our assessment helps providers screen for these behaviors, develop an inventory, not only rejection, but also acceptance. And this is a really important part of this work. So there are lots of great ways to use these posters. They're in 4 sizes. The camera-ready art is there. These are the most cost-effective tools for doing education. It's why you see posters all over the place, especially in clinical settings. It's how we help people do smoking cessation over decades, really to reduce the level of smoking in the US. Imagine these posters in a waiting room, in a pediatrician's exam room, in your school counselor's office, in your congregation's education space, in a public library, in educational spaces for child welfare and juvenile justice, and in every space where children, youth, or families are served. Mm-hmm. Posters with background information about our work, 20 to 25 accepting and rejecting behaviors that are common across cultural groups in different languages. We can make a powerful difference to change the dialogue, to change the discussion, really to change the way people think about this, but we have to put these in places where people can see them and where youth can see them, because youth have internalized rejecting behaviors as the norm. This is the price of being connected to my family. This is the price of someone loving me. This is the price of living in this world. We can only change that when they understand that those behaviors are harmful and hurtful, and they don't have to happen. So I encourage you to think about getting these posters, having your agencies print them. You know, I can print 1,000 8.5 by 11 posters for about $150. You know, what does that cost to save a life? So what are we talking about with the Family Acceptance Project? Well, first of all, we can't change anyone. We can hardly change ourselves most of the time. But when it comes to motivating people to change their behaviors, we have to give them a good reason to change. We have to help them understand why it's helpful, why it's important, why it makes a difference, and what are the steps they can do to do that. So we start with the parent and caregiver. We then teach them how to engage and require respect from extended family members, how to support their child in their family, how to support and advocate for their child in their schools, with peer relationships, in their congregations, in their cultural and mainstream communities. So we're not only teaching the parent to support their child at home, but outside the home, in all the parts of their cultural worlds, where they can then help that child integrate an affirmed, positive LGBT identity in the context of all of those domains, if you will. And in doing that, we're really changing civil society.
That's amazing, Caitlin. Just, you know, the breadth and depth of the work, and the ability for the work to really transform, you know, families. We're unfortunately running really low on time, so I want to just reiterate that if you're listening to this, you know, go on to the Family Acceptance Project website, get the posters, get the posters up in all the places where you work with young people. That is going to make a huge difference. And, you know, and get in touch with the Family Acceptance Project. They're doing training all over the world, that if you are in a child welfare agency, if you're a clinician, if you are working with families, you need the materials that that Caitlin and her work provides to people. Caitlin, I can see the website is on the bottom. Is there a last, I mean, I loved how you sort of came that you can change the culture, you can change society. Is there any last, you know, sort of comment or statement that you want to make in closing? And see, you said you couldn't do this in a half an hour. Like, you did it, girl.
Well, I had a half an hour. You cut a few minutes off there, Robin. I'll go at you. Yes, you have to start where the family is, and you have to have hope. We have to have hope in order to give these children hope. And I would say the good news is their families want to help them. Of all the work I've ever done, I've hardly found families that really want to kill their children. They may be furious or upset or hurt or whatever, but they want to help their children. And if you can join with them and build a relationship, an affirmative relationship as an ally with them to help them help their child and keep their family together, they'll join with you to do that.
Yeah.
And it takes patience. It takes, you know, some knowledge. That's why a lot of our work has built strategies and approaches and framing to teach people how to do this, but it can be done. Just one word about the posters. Please don't print them on your ratty old printers.
No, do them. I mean, it's $150 for 1,000. Come on, y'all.
Well, the little sizes, but they go all the way up to, you know, 24 by 36. Take them to a professional printer. Have, you know, even a donor doesn't have to be a wealthy donor. Just give you a few $100s to print these and put them everywhere. We're also, I've developed a whole framing to collaborate with communities to put these posters out, and agencies, and we're always looking for partners to work with. So feel free to reach out to us, and let's change the world together.
Caitlin, thank you so much. I appreciate your expertise, and I appreciate your generosity of spirit. So thank you for joining us today. I know you have a really crazy busy schedule, so I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thanks, Robin, and have a great MiniCon.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. All right. Bye, Caitlin. So I've got some folks waiting in the waiting room. I'm letting them in now. And so I'm going to actually, let me change how the screen is showing here as soon as I figure out how to do that. This is in the way. There we go. Okay. Hi, Dave. Hi, everybody. I got to turn out. There's Jasmine. Let me turn the video back on for. Hold on a second. I can't see. Ask to start video. So I'm sorry we're running a little bit late, but we're back. We're back. So I'm just going to get out of the way, and I'm going to turn this over to Rae. To start the conversation. I don't want to take up any more of your time. So I think there's really important stuff that you're going to hear with this panel of experts. So I'm getting off, and Rae, you got it.
Thank you, Robin. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to be mindful of the time, so I want to have quick introductions. We have David here to my right, who currently serves as a magnet resource teacher at Elm City Montessori School in New Haven, Connecticut, while pursuing his MED in school leadership through Teachers College Summer Principals Academia. He began teaching 5th grade Spanish-speaking newcomers at the Fairhaven School in 2015. He also serves as an adjunct faculty at a Relay Graduate School of Education and Quinnipiac University School of Education. He also has presented at our True Colors Conference three of the past years that we've held the conference. And he has recently been awarded the GLSEN Connecticut's Teacher Ally of the Year Award for 2017. Welcome, David. Next, we have Alberto, just below him, who is a doctoral candidate and a teaching assistant at UConn School of Social Work. He's been a community organizer and policy advocate for over a decade. His doctoral research focuses on improving the health outcomes of sex workers and increasing their access to social services and programs. Welcome, Alberto. Next, we have Mobile Burrell, who is an advocate for equity and fierce believer in the possibilities of creating a world that everyone feels good calling home. Mobile's worked on behalf of folks with marginalized identity within the U.S., including racial minorities, LGBTQ plus youth, impacted by foster care, and more. Mobile strives to hone many of her skills to better serve families who most need it. This skilled group facilitator continues to work on building community and facilitating dialogue to propel positive change. And last but not least, we have Jasmine. Hello, Jasmine. She lives and works in New York, where she is a model for We Speak Models. She is a former True Colors mentee as well, and often speaks to groups about her experiences growing up in out-of-home care and the role that mentoring has to play in her life. I'm Rae Perteet, and so a lot of these questions, as the mentoring coordinator of True Colors, I will be focused on making those connections a little healthier and stronger as we talk about best practices. Well, just to be candid and genuine as we start off, this is a rough social moment that we're having. It certainly is heavy laden. So as we start, especially in light of everything that's going on in our world today, what's one thing that you might wish white folks knew, did, or thought when it comes to working with LGBTQ plus youth of color?
Happy to hop in. This is Mobile, and I prefer they, them, theirs, or just my name or any variation thereof. Mobes, Mobi-Wan, Mo, whatever's clever. Some people like T-Mobile. And one thing I think about when I wish what white folks thought about is keeping intersectionality at the forefront when working with LGBTQ plus youth who are part of the global majority. I think that everyone's experiences are so unique just based on the various identities that they hold. If you think about young people who identify as Muslim and LGBTQ and Black and in foster care, like there's so many different layers to keep in mind. So I think keeping that at the forefront is really helpful so that you can come to a space really with the intent to listen and to learn where possible. It's really hard to say, like, do this one thing or keep this thing at the forefront besides just being open to learning and recognizing that we don't know how people are experiencing their lives through the world. So making sure that we can be open to supporting them in whatever ways make sense for them and helping them access spaces that they need, resources that they need, and making sure it's done through a lens of intersectionality.
Yeah, as a white person on the panel, I'd love to chime in. I think that starting with questions like, was school safe? Is home safe? Like, if we know a ton about the identities of our students, then we should be providing disproportionate service and outreach and resources and relationship to those students at this time, especially if students are coming from places where home does not feel like a safe place to identify as LGBTQ. Those are students who might have felt safe in school, might have felt safe with us as educators, and we have an extra responsibility to be connecting.
I definitely want to agree with Mobile that keeping intersectionality at the forefront and recognizing that when you work with LGBTQ plus youth that are white versus LGBTQ youth that are people of color and Black, that race has a huge part of their life and that it should be recognized and celebrated and at the forefront of how they're being taken care of.
Absolutely, and thank you for that.
So I have to agree with all of the panelists thus far. My name is Alberto, and as Rayfield said, I wear many hats in the community, but I'm going to put on my GLSEN hat. So I've been a longtime member of GLSEN Connecticut for the last 16 years. GLSEN Connecticut is a chapter of GLSEN National, and we work to promote safe schools for all students, regardless of sexual orientation and gender identity expression. So there are 4 main interventions that we focus on in general for students. We have a lot of them already in Connecticut, fortunately. We have a comprehensive anti-bullying law for federally funded schools. We have a lot of supportive educators, a lot of educators that are getting trained. And we also have a lot of gender sexual alliances. And these are organizations, student-led organizations that really help provide a more supportive climate, more affirming climate for LGBTQ students and their allies. We're still working on inclusive curriculum. That's the big thing. And to tie it in with LGBTQ people of color, one of the things that we really focus on is the school to prison pipeline, which if some of you have not heard of it, it's the phenomenon that people who are LGBTQ, as well as people who are of color, who are differently abled, are disproportionately targeted by discipline and punishment. So they're more likely than, say, cisgender, white students, non-immigrants. They're disproportionately targeted to being disciplined and punished. We don't really. And we know that when people are suspended more often, when they're in detention more often, that interrupts the learning process. And so one of the things that we're trying to do as an organization is to help teachers not be a part of that problem of this school to prison pipeline, which is putting a lot of LGBTQ students of color in particular in terms of this disproportionate discipline and punishment, which we know later can lead to incarceration, has increased incarceration. We can connect it with the murder of George Floyd. We can connect it with all the racist, this other pandemic that we're undergoing, racism. We can connect it, but it often starts within the schools, within these institutions that are supposed to make our youth feel safe. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do as an organization, to really tackle that and address that by helping educators affirm LGBTQ identities, affirm their different identities. One of the panelists talked about intersectionality, how important that was, but also seeking out resources that are specifically tailored for students of color, that are not just one size fits all but specific resources that can really help educators and school staff really affirm and be supportive to LGBTQ students of color.
Thank you, and everyone who was on the panel. Bro, just a follow-up question. You mentioned some of that disparity that often happens between individuals of color, LGBTQ youth, having access to the same sort of resources and things to equip them. What could we do as advocates to sort of increase that access? Is there anything that we could do to, in particular?
I think that's a great question, Refield. I think the first thing I think we need to do is to get informed and to talk about it. If we don't talk about it, often these issues are just swept under the carpet. They're not talked about. Often these come in the forms of microaggressions. Some panelists were talking about that previously, and we don't talk about it. We acknowledge that it hurts us, maybe to ourselves. We don't really talk about it in the open, and I think we need to be honest. We need to be straightforward about it and really talk to our students. Often people have heard of like the teachable moment. So instead of when someone says a fag or some racially, some anti-race epithet, like what can you do instead of just letting it go or just like, I'm gonna talk to you after class later. Like what can you do in the moment to really help not only that the student that's being affected, that may be victimized, but also the perpetrator and the classroom in general, because it really is something that you have to look at it not just in terms of how it affects the individual, but how it affects the school climate. So I think that's like one thing we can do to talk about it, to acknowledge it that exists, but then we need to take action and often, and I know I've heard Robin say this a lot. I've heard a lot of really great organizations that help LGBTQ youth. When you see mean, intervene. Simple as that. You got to intervene. You got to do something about it. So that's on a very micro level. But also, there's being able to realize that you don't know everything. I've been involved with GLSEN for 16 years. I don't know everything. I'm not going to confess that I know everything. So being able to refer out to organizations or refer, if you're a teacher, like let me talk to the school social worker, let me talk to the assistant principal or the state school climate coordinator, being able to refer out and to know what other resources are available. So you feel like you're not alone in trying to resolve the issue.
I love that. And particularly being able to have those transparent conversations and the courage to act after those discoveries. Now, mobile, oftentimes one of the sticking points for youth receiving the resources that they need to equip them is simply having mentor support. Oftentimes the difficulty is having enough mentors and advocates that are willing and capable. You have a program that has been quite successful in Massachusetts with over 300 youth, and I understand you have some successful matches. What would you attribute your success to in having those great connections that are able to sort of lead them through?
That's a great question. Yeah, so we are Silver Lining Mentoring based in Boston, Massachusetts, and we work primarily with young people who are impacted by the foster care system in the state. And the Institute works with partnering with other programs to help them answer just that question. And what can we do to make sure we're building those strong matches? So one thing that we do are really take thorough measures to screen and train our mentors with very intentional topics, because we know that strong relationships come from the start. We have to make sure that there's trust built early on. And the way that we do that is screening to make sure that mentors are coming in with an open-mindedness to connecting with folks and that they're really letting young people lead the relationships. We have a very thorough interview process. We have clear expectations around what the roles look like, around our approach. For example, we have some of our values are that we are harm reduction. So we make sure that mentors are aware of what that means and how that shows up in relationship, so that if young people are reaching out for advice, for example, that they know that their role is to make sure that young people are able to make the choices in the most safe way that they can, rather than to say, here's what I think you should or should not do. So we're making sure that we're training mentors to let young people guide the conversations in a way that feels safe and healthy from their perspective, and that they have the agency to lead their own lives. Another piece of that is with our training, we are really purposeful about the topics that we include. So we talk very explicitly about cultural responsiveness in the topic areas of mentoring youth who are LGBTQ+, mentoring youth who are differently abled, mentoring youth who are people of the global majority, mentoring youth in various categories. And we dive deep during our training to really explore what are your own beliefs, what are your own identities as a mentor, what are some of the biases that you currently hold that you're aware of or that may show up in different interactions that you might not even be aware of. And so we screen during that entire process and say, what are some of the ways that we as a program can offer support where we know that you're going to need additional support or additional resources in a particular area. So we tailor that support to each mentor or match relationship so that we're not thinking that everyone is going to benefit from the same one resource. We know that that's not true. We know that intersectionality means that different resources have to be targeted differently. So that's another piece of it, is that the match support we offer is very individualized and targeted for the matches that we support. And we also let young people, their voices are centered. So youth really drive what our programming looks like. We have a whole program that was created because young people said, we are approaching the age of aging out of foster care and into independence, but we don't really know how to do like managing a bank account, and we don't really know how to find an apartment. So we created an entire program to respond to that, to teach them those life skills, to partner them with a mentor to help them on that journey. So we are really responsive in centering youth voice. I think that's a huge piece of it. And the other piece is just having support throughout the organization from leadership down and making sure that everyone recognizes the importance of and the value of having that sort of individualized targeted support, and that you can really get people on board where they need to be. There's a lot of different small pieces, but I think just really being purposeful about how we're interacting with the matches and the mentors and how we're screening and training folks is a huge part of it.
Well, that's wonderful. And hopefully we can have an opportunity to talk a little bit more offline. But I love the perspective of the you first and looking at the individual and how their needs have to be met through the program. That's wonderful. Absolutely. And Jasmine.
On that front, if I can, Rae, I just want to shout out the New Haven Pride Center as a place that sort of from a mentoring lens has hired people specifically for roles as a Latinx program officer, a women's program officer, a youth program officer, that like through the idea of like specializing, you actually can build a lot of powerful and important connections. So yeah, and those are new hires. The organization's been expanding and thinking that through. So if anyone is from a smaller place and wants to know, like, have the New Haven Pride Center do it to like hire on more part-time staff and think those programs through, I'd recommend reaching out.
Thank you so much for that resource. And Jasmine, you have a unique perspective when it comes to mentor-mentee relationships because you've been through the process. And so I'd like to ask you, what perhaps is the number one or number two things that you can think of that mentees need that is often overlooked by advocates?
I think it's really important, like allies are great, but I think it's important to match people with people that are similar to them. And like David was saying, like specializing the mentee and the mentor matches to be somewhere that you can connect with and share experiences with. I had a cis woman as my mentor when I was at True Colors, but I loved her, and we had a lot of similar experiences that we shared, and just like daily check-ins I think are really important. You know, you never know how somebody's feeling, especially during a time like this, especially when you're a Black person in the country right now in a time like this. And just like always checking in, even if they seem okay, you know, I think that's really important because I think a lot of people that are young don't know how to share like personal experiences sometimes with older adults. And I think that was part of my problem, was being embarrassed or not being able to be comfortable to share without being asked like what I was going through, what I was feeling. And I think it was really important to be asked that and to, you know, open that conversation, that dialect with your mentee so that they feel comfortable and open with you.
That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you. And is there anything else that you can think of that mentors should be able to hear who are listening to have that successful connection?
I think just find shared experiences with your mentee and just like really try to connect with people, try to connect with what they like and try to have similar experiences and similar interests and things that you like to do, and just be really non-judgmental, try to listen as much as possible. I personally feel like try not to fix their problems all the time, but maybe just be an ear for them, because if you're able to just speak freely and be able to be listened to, I think that's really important.
Absolutely. We have one of our mentors who was able to form a bond and a connection over the video game Animal Crossing. And that's sort of been the hub of how they build their relationship. So absolutely, finding those connection points. And David, to you, you seem to have your ear towards the pulse of what's happening with the youth and all of your work at True Conference, as well as at True Colors Conference, as well as in the school system. We may have some mentors who are having those first times of making those connections. What would you say to them is important as they're establishing that rapport, just starting to build that sort of relationship?
Yeah, so first I'd say that there are important ways in which I have my ear to the ground and many ways in which I don't. So I do not identify as LGBTQ. I'm a straight, white, cisgender male with tons of privileged identities. And I think that I'd say the two things to think through, and these might sound conflicting, but I hope that it might make some sense, is like, first, I think it's important to reach beyond my own identity and see that LGBTQ equity and justice is all of our work. And so if you have, so I'm speaking now to people who are watching who might identify as cis or straight or whatever. If you have not seen this as your work before, but you're like paying attention for the first time, please find a way to see this as your work. But the other piece that I want to mention is that I sort of always sort of straddle this line of like balancing getting out of the way versus taking on labor, right? So it's important that because of my identities, I find ways to like get out of the way and elevate and emphasize like other people's work and try and minimize my voice. And at the same time, I guess I've tried to like do the work of taking on people's labor. So I look out for grunt work of LGBTQ, like people who I work with. I try and take up the stuff that people don't want to do, secretarial work, taking on workshops that people don't want to lead, so that I can be supportive in ways that other folks might need.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. To sort of minimize your own presence so that you can allow others to shine through and be able to listen to their perspectives. That's wonderful. Are there any other, we're talking about best practices as we sort of get ready to wrap up. Are there any other, from any other panel members, anything that you'd like to suggest in terms of making those healthy connections, helping our youth make that transition from where they are to where we want them to be?
Well, I think, like I said before, I'm really very much in favor of letting students lead, really amplifying student voices. And so I think we need to capitalize on their voices. I mean, there are really great examples of students who are really taking the lead, not only on Black Lives Matter, but on after Parkland, after the violence in Parkland, gun violence, and all these different movements, these different cultural shifts have been in some way led by youth who in many ways are not seen as powerful. They're seen as, they have no political, but they can't vote. They can't, they can tell their story to a legislator, but I think we kind of built on a narrative that youth are powerless and that they can't really do anything. And that's a narrative that that GLSEN definitely doesn't espouse. We are much for amplifying student voices and letting them lead. In fact, if you do go to the GLSEN website, the glisten.org website, a recent statement that was made about racial justice and about the George Floyd murder and about other anti-racist work was made by the student leadership cohort of the National Student Leadership Cohort of GLSEN National. They're the ones that really took a stand, and they're the voices that GLSEN amplified, because they're gonna lead us into the future. They're gonna, as the cliche goes, they're gonna really they're gonna hopefully make those people that are complacent or think the status quo is okay to really kind of get some kind of like aha moment, or some kind of like this affects me. This doesn't just affect people outside of myself. This affects me too. And I'm really proud of the youth that are doing a lot of work. I know because of COVID-19, the Day of Silence in April, that's a silent protest against homophobia and transphobia, that went completely virtual because of COVID-19. But the youth made it work nationally. and teachers and staff were very supportive remotely. And I think that's what I think True Colors and a lot of great organizations do. They build solidarity and community in the worst of like historical circumstances. But in a way, this is nothing new. Police brutality, racism, transphobia, homophobia, this is nothing new. So I think we just keep talking about it. We can't be silent, because silence is complicity. So that's my last word.
Well, it certainly is powerful, and I appreciate each voice on this particular panel as we talk, as we've reviewed sort of best practices, and I hope that each one watching is empowered to help empower the voices of youth, which indeed are the persons that are going to lead us forward, and hopefully they can figure out the mess that we haven't quite figured out as of yet. Alberto, thank you so much. David, Mobile, Jasmine, thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
Thank y'all. Happy Pride.
We're
And Black
signing
Lives
off.
Matter. Be safe.
Time to go. Bye. I can't hear you, Rob.
Robin, you're muted.
Thank you, everybody. That was
All right. Bye.
I appreciate it. Bye.
Bye.
I'm gonna bring into the room now one of my favorite people. Hi, James.
Hi.
And James is clear. He's really one of my favorite people in the universe.
Likewise, back and forth. Same.
Yeah, he's a writer, a storyteller, the founder of the Trevor Project. He's been doing a project called Future Perfect Project. That's I said it right? Did I say it right, James?
You did. Yep, you did.
Because I get names for myself, but that's really been transformative for many of the youth that have been participating, and he's offering it again this summer. So I'm going to shut up and let James talk about it.
Hi, everybody. Hi. So happy to be here. And Robin, you are truly one of my favorite people. What you're doing in the world, what you've been continuing to do in this world, making the young people feel safe, seen, and celebrated for so many years. It's like really, you're a trailblazer and showing us how to do it. So I take a lot from you. So, you know, as you know, like for the past 2.5 years, I've been traveling around the country with a team of teaching artists and along with my co-founder, Ryan Amador. And we go into schools for a week. We work with GSAs and arts high schools and LGBT youth centers around the country, offering true storytelling and songwriting workshops. And it's just been, I just feel like this generation of young people is so extraordinary in their ability to just stand up for social justice, for one thing, their ability to communicate their feelings, their reinvention of gender and sexuality, which is just, so, you know, for old timers like us, it's so refreshing to see a new generation come along and just reinvent it and be able to be articulate about it. So we just decided that we believe that the self-expression of LGBT and questioning young people and allies is really a declaration of a better future for everybody, because where, you know, young queer kids are safe, seen, and celebrated, everybody in the environment is basically safe, seen, and celebrated. So for me, giving them the tools to tell their story is like the next step. So we're not telling it for them. They're actually saying, okay, here's our story. This is what we believe. This is what we want. This is what we see for the future. And in March, when the COVID hit, we stopped traveling and had to quickly figure out, well, what do we do? And realized, I think 2 weeks after the shutdown, the Trevor Project came out with that their calls on their lifeline had, and their communications through Trevor Chat and Trevor Text had more than doubled in just 2 weeks. And it just kept growing incrementally as these young people were in their bedrooms, many of them in households that were unaccepting, as you know. And so we just thought, well, let's create a window. Let's create a Zoom window into a world in which they can meet on a platform where they're safe and where they can express themselves, and also get to talk to one another around the country. And it's been so incredible to watch this little experiment that we did as a kind of stopgap measure to turn into something that is providing young people with an opportunity to connect with one another, really, and to express their wisdom, really. It's the way that I think about it. So, and we take their work and, with their permission, we're animating it. We're doing these like little sound bites of things that they say. We're featuring their work on Instagram and TikTok. And it's just so great to have created this window and then create a window back out into the world, giving them an opportunity to speak for themselves. So this summer, starting next week, we're starting to offer a number of workshops. In addition to our regular weekly workshop, we're offering workshops in filmmaking, photography, drag, making a radio show. So, we're getting professionals to come on board who are offering their expertise to do these one-time workshops and sometimes ongoing workshops. So you can find all that information at thefutureperfectproject.com and sign up. It's for high school students, high school age students. But 13, having just graduated is fine too. We have a couple of people who are 13, a few people who are a little older. But it's really about giving them a voice. Say that again.
I'm muted. Holly just put the thefutureperfectproject.com in the notes, because it's live streaming in a bunch of different channels. So she just put it in there so that anybody who's watching can find where to go.
It's just so incredible to me, and I'm sure you have this experience as well, which is that when we started this work, we started it because young people were so in the shadows. Right. I mean, that was the name of your organization, wasn't it?
Yeah. Children from
when it started.
Yeah.
And over the past 25 years, like the shadow is less and less. There's more brightness. It's just less and less shadow. And young people, although many of them are still struggling and they're still in environments that aren't welcoming, the amount of peer-to-peer support, the amount of encouragement that I get from seeing these young people so bravely being themselves, often in environments that are not conducive to being yourself, it's so inspiring.
Yeah.
To see how that's changed so quickly. 25 years.
When we first started the conference back in 1994, for the first few conferences, we used to have to offer workshops in the afternoon for adults who didn't have this. That the adults that came to as volunteers or whatever, they felt so angry and so sad that they didn't have, a level of support. And that, I think the internet has revolutionized the ways that young people are able to talk to each other, and that a lot of their exploring and evolving of identities is in this fluid online sort of, but this really, but more, but like this. And
and for many of them, it's a lifeline, right? And while we worry about them and think, oh my God, they're on their phones, and oh my God, too much technology. For them, what I've heard from many of them, most of them, it's like, it's not a problem. This is our world, right? And so instead, what I always say is, when I was their age, I was on the phone all the time, and my parents, it drove them insane. And I just tell young people, well, I obviously was doing some early training for my role as the founder of a lifeline, a suicide prevention and crisis intervention lifeline on the telephone. That's how we started. So I was just doing early research.
Early research, exactly.
So who knows what they will create in the
Right.
future out of this world, right?
And I
That
just
will benefit others.
love how much room you give them to create. You know, a lot of times adults, you know, as well-meaning as we might be, you know, we lead way more than we follow. You know, like in the last panel, they were talking about, you know, our job is to give young people the tools and the support and to let them be, not let them, but to get the heck out of their way. You know?
And also to provide inspiration.
Yeah.
But more importantly, space for them to really feel the full flower of their being.
Yeah.
Like that's what we didn't have. You know, my dear friend Eve Ensler always says, you know, we're here to give the thing we need the most.
Yeah. Exactly.
And what we didn't have were, you know, kind eyes and hearts to give us the space to be ourselves, right?
Exactly.
And that's what we can give other people. And you know, we're especially, you know, right now with everything going on, really like, especially reaching out to, you know, young people, queer people of color and young allies of color who really are feeling maybe like, where do I go to find my community? Because there's so much intersectionality in the queer community. It's like, can we as the queer community expand and really make it as inclusive as possible and stand up for our, you know, Black brothers and sisters and non-binary people?
Exactly. So again, we only had a short period of time.
Yeah, no, this was great. It's so great to see you. And I welcome everyone to come to our workshops. Just come, we'll welcome you. We'll give you a wonderful creative.
Right. James, thank you so much for everything. It was lovely to see you. And hopefully a lot of our young people will be seeing you through the summer. And that starts next week, y'all. So futureperfect.com. Get there.
But come anytime. You can drop in anytime.
Great.
Love you, Robin.
Love
Be
you
well.
Be well. Thanks. Bye-bye. Okay. And I just saw that that Nikki was in the waiting room and she left the waiting room. So I am thinking about, if somebody could go on Facebook and send a note to Nikki to ask her to come back. I'm going to do a quick piece here, and then if you go on my Facebook page, honey, I'm going to do a quick piece here, and then we will hopefully Nikki will come back. Oh, here she comes. She's back in the room. Let me just let her back in. Okay. All right. Nikki, hi. Sorry. Jess, I went to let you in and you were gone.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. So welcome. I haven't showed your video yet. Do you want to talk a little bit first and then show the video, or do you want me to show the video first? How would you like to do it?
Whatever. I guess you could show it first and then we'll talk.
All right, let me see if I know how to do this. So hopefully I'm going to be able to do this, and we'll be right back. So go anywhere. Can somebody let me know if you're seeing the video? Nikki, are you seeing the video on the screen?
Hold on. So.
Oh, wait, here it is. There it is. We got it now. All right. Hey, I'm getting better at this tech stuff. So here we go. Maybe I'm getting better at this tech stuff. There it is.
It's so slow.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Is it the connection?
We're not hearing the sound. Let me see if I can figure out where the sound is. Yeah. So
the connection speed is so
low.
So.
So I'm showing that all of the sound is on. Let me see what this says. That's not what I want to do. There we go. I just saw. No, I'm showing it from my, let me see what this says.
Did anyone else's work fine?
No, you know what? I think it's not. I'm going to stop it.
Yeah.
Stop sharing the screen. I'm not sure what happened, why it's not doing the audio on the screen. So I apologize for that.
It's okay.
But why don't we start with, tell us a little bit about, who you are. I know that you are a pop star, you're a songwriter, you're an actor, you're a model, you're a host, you're a member of the House of Extravaganza, one of the oldest houses in New York, right?
Yes.
But so tell us a little bit more about you.
That sums it up. No, I don't know. I started singing since I was a little kid. The first thing I ever asked my mom for was a microphone. So that's just something in my blood. I've been singing since I was tiny. My first albums were Madonna and RuPaul, so they were like a huge inspiration. And then I just was always in chorus and theater all my life, so just been quite the little actor. And then I don't know, I transitioned, I guess, as soon as I graduated high school, I started to transition fully with hormones and stuff like that. And I just did everything quick. So I wanted to get my GRS, which is the gender reassignment surgery, as fast as possible. There was a moment where my mom didn't accept it, so that was a little difficult. But my dad was like nowhere around. I never had a relationship with my father. He passed away when I was like, I think 14 years old. So the first time I ever met him was in a casket.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, I had like a stepfather, just didn't work with my mom. So it's kind of like, my mom was pretty much just like raising me. Then she remarried, and, my dad was still with the police force. So that was a little hard to deal with, being trans or being different, being gay, trying to figure myself out, and then having a stepdad that's like, a cop. So it just kind of clashed.
Yeah.
And I went through a lot of issues, like mentally, and a lot of bullying. I mean, it's the same story for many kids out there that go through what I go through. So, I just had to find myself. So there was just a time where I had to live with friends to move to finish high school, like to finish graduating, just because I would always fight with my mom and fight with my stepfather. And then I pretty much just started my life. Like, I lived with my grandmother for a minute in Staten Island, and she always accepted me. Some of like half my family always accepted me, So she was like the cool grandma, the grandma that drinks and smokes pot, that kind of grandma. So she's the Latina Puerto Rican, like she's just like always swearing. And and I appreciate and I love her so much for being so open arms to me during my transition. She was the one who got me to talk back with my mom. When my mom had cut me off. So like when I looked female, after my hormones, my grandmother set it up where I was hiding in the bathroom, and my mom came in, and I came out of the bathroom, and my mom was like, but she didn't have any clue who I was.
Wow.
So, we had a heart to heart, and now everything is good. I get along with my mom. I get along with my stepfather. It was a long journey. We have our ups and downs, but I don't know. I feel like Trump supporters are always a certain way with the LGBT. And that's just the way it'll always be. They have a certain way of the way they think, and I feel like they're so brainwashed by a lot of things. And they really, if it doesn't affect them, like if something happens to me, it just doesn't affect them. Not like, oh my God, my daughter's going through this, or oh, it affects my daughter. It's almost like, oh, well, it doesn't affect me, so we don't really care. But it does affect me because if I'm a leader and I'm a public figure in the LGBTQ community and an ally, then if I do voice my opinion on something, then it should matter to you if I'm your child,
Right.
So we still go through our differences. But I know my mom loves me, so it's just always going to be like that.
There's a young person asked a question a while ago, and maybe you're the right person to answer it because of your own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, he's experienced a lot of rejection from his family, that
Mm-hmm.
he attempted suicide twice.
Yeah, same.
Decided that he wasn't going to die over them.
Mm-hmm.
He wondered, like, how do you keep from hating them when it feels like they hate you?
Yeah. So like sorry, somebody was trying to call me. So basically, like, I went through the same journey. I tried committing suicide. I don't like to push that out there to people that I went through that, but I did. And 16, I had to go to the hospital for 2 weeks because I tried to commit suicide, taking a bunch of pills and alcohol. I used to cut myself. I still have scars on my wrists and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that is just really much, it's not the answer. I feel like there is just a moment where you have to just forgive them for their ignorance, and sometimes it's going to be hard to do it. But see, sometimes I go through it where I'm just like so over it with them, like their ignorance, and I try to educate them. But you have to understand, you're here for a purpose. And this is my message to anyone who tries to hurt themselves or stuff like that. Like, you are here, you're special, you matter, and God has a purpose for you here. So don't take your life. And sometimes things feel like the end of the world, and sometimes things feel like it's like I can't deal with this, and I can't deal with that, and I hate this person, and these people hate me, and this stuff like that. But it does get better. Those days come and go. I still go through a roller coaster of emotions, and sometimes I feel like jumping off a balcony, and sometimes I love myself, and sometimes I hate myself, and sometimes I love myself, and sometimes and this is normal with hormones, because it's a roller coaster ride, and you just have to stay on that ride, and you can't ever get off of it. You just have to roll with the punches, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and in your story, your grandmother was able to sort of form a bridge back to your mom.
Yeah.
So I would ask this young person if there's somebody in his family that he's still connected with that maybe could help form a bridge. A lot of times, over time, families find their way back.
Mm-hmm. They come to terms with it eventually. So don't give up hope. I know sometimes in the beginning, like I said, my mother cut me off. She did. I said, Mom, I want to be trans. I can remember that phone call. And she said, no, you're not. I gave birth to a son. You're not going to do this. And I said, it's not up to you. It's not up to you. It's my decision. It's my body, And she says, you're going to look ridiculous. And I'm just like, and I did it. And I feel like, I accomplished what I never thought I could,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And your advice to the young person said sometimes they just responded and said, sometimes I just get tired of the ride. And that, it's normal to get tired of the ride sometimes.
Yeah.
Your point about sometimes you're like this, sometimes you're like that. It's really about holding on.
It's true, because it wasn't overnight. My family finally accepted me 2 years later, so sometimes it just takes some time, but you don't need a family to have relevance. You don't need a family I know it's hard when you're young, but I have a chosen family. I don't have the best bond with my mom or stepfather, my real, family. I have a chosen family. I have, trans daughters. I have gay sons. I have gay brothers. I have gay trans sisters. That's my family. I consider them. They've always been there for me. When I have surgeries, they pick me up. When I ever had a problem, they let me money. If I ever needed a ride here, they always there for me. Like, if somebody was bullying me, they were there to protect me, like things like that. Like, that's who I feel. So you need to find people in your community that you can make your family, and you can get that, you know, the comfort, I guess, you need, like, you know, like instead of like your own family.
Yeah, yeah, that's really a great point. I'm sorry that we weren't able to show your video. Why don't we tell folks how they could to hear your music and stay in touch with you?
Sure. Well, you guys can see the video because I have it on my Instagram page, which is Nikki Exotika. Instagram is NIKKIEXOTIKA, not a C. So you guys can check that out and go to my IGTV, and then you'll see all my performances. I have music videos on, you know, YouTube. I have a Vivo channel. So if you look up Nikki Exotika on Vivo, you'll see a couple of my music videos there. I do have another music video coming out soon, probably in about a few weeks. It's called In the Night. So I'm excited for that. It's very comic book superhero, almost like, it's an old school video. I don't know if a lot of people remember the group Aha, but there was this group Aha that had this song called Take On Me, if you look it up, and then it was kind of like human to comic characters. So that's pretty much my the image vision of the music video. So you guys could find me there. You can also go to NikkiExotikaOfficial.com and send me a message if you just need advice or whatever. I do answer my messages, my emails, and if you just need like a little bit of advice, I can be there as a support system for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Nikki. It was great talking to you. It was great seeing you. I just appreciate that you know, were willing to come on and talk to folks and share your experience and give some advice to our young people. So thank you very much.
Okay.
And we will look forward to talking with you again sometime.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. See you later. Bye. So believe it or not, we've sort of run out of time. We've only got a few more minutes, so I want to take a minute to remind people that you can now order our masks that as we told you, that they're organic cotton on the inside. They come in a bunch of different styles and, you know, meet the criteria for you know, for face masks as required by the CDC. And so in order to get those, Holly, do we have if you look in that, if you check on in the notes, in whether you're on Facebook or you're on the YouTube channel, on YouTube, we can't do a link, but on the Facebook channel, which is the True Colors Facebook channel, you can get that link there, and you can order those, and you can actually start ordering them right now if you wanted to. So I want to say thank you to all of the folks who were on the show today, on the MiniCon today, that they donated their time and experience, and we are so very grateful. Next week, we're going to be focused on wellness and spirituality. There will be a variety of different programs and activities around wellness, and in our keynote is Kai Davis, who is a spoken word artist who's done a lot of work around spirituality and self-care. So I'm really excited for Kai to come on next week. So thanks very much, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Again, all of this is going to be on the YouTube channel. It'll be stored there. It's also on the True Colors Facebook page. This time today, we did the True Colors Inc. Instagram page. Next week and the week after, we're going to do the GSA Instagram page. So watch for us. And if you have questions or comments or thoughts, please send them along to us. And we look forward to, yes, and somebody just put their hand up. What?
They don't have a filter, but they're 2 layers organic cotton.
Right, they don't have a filter. So I was supposed to say that they don't have a filter, but they're 2 layers and they're organic cotton facing you. They're washable and so on. So thanks very much, everybody. Have a great rest of your Friday, and we will see you next week.